Oh, wrecking the place here. Well, anyway, it is indeed a pleasure for me to welcome back our guest speaker today, Tim Lambert. Tim has been here before 2 other times, so this will be his 3rd visit. Again, happy to have him back. Tim has led the Texas Homeschool Coalition, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization for homeschool families since 1990. And under his leadership, the Homeschool Association has become the largest state home school advocacy, I can't pronounce that word today, group in the country. In that capacity, he speaks to various groups around Texas, helps inform the public, the legislators, and state and federal agencies about home education in Texas, and trains homeschool leaders in public relations and political activities. Tim has been active in the political arena for more than 3 decades and is committed to serving the homeschool community and protecting parents' God-given constitutional right to raise their children as they see fit, including the education of their children. So please welcome our guest speaker, Tim Lambert.
Well, thank you guys for having me back. You know, it's always, I always wondered when somebody has me back a 2nd time or even a 3rd time, maybe they got a new membership and so they don't remember me from the last time. But it's good to be with you. I have to tell you, I was reading an article this morning from the Heritage Foundation, and Solomon said, you know, there is nothing new under the sun. And, or as Yogi Berra would say, it's deja vu all over again. And I thought about that. This article was talking about the robust economy that we are experiencing. And some have said that it looks like it may actually surpass the growth that we saw in 1983 as a result of the Reagan tax cuts.
Wow.
And they also said that Vladimir Putin and Russia are responding to this specifically in relationship to the deregulation of the oil and gas industry and all that sort of thing, very similar to the way that the Russians responded to Reagan when he offered what was referred to in a negative way as the Star Wars defense system. And for those of you who are younger and may not remember those days, probably most of you don't remember those days, Reagan became aggressive, some said. In fact, the media said that he was a crazy man who was going to start World War III. And he had this crazy idea that the United States should defend itself, that we should increase our military capabilities, and that we should lead from a position of strength. And as such, he forced Gorbachev into a negotiation. Gorbachev literally, maybe not literally, begged him to drop this whole defense system. And Reagan, of course, refused. The Russians realized they could not, with their economy, compete with that sort of thing. And as Paul Harvey used to say, and the rest of the story is that the USSR imploded, and many of those countries became free, and we saw freedom break out all over the globe. So Reagan was one of the guys who got me involved. It's really, we could probably do, how many of you remember Reagan and he was the reason you got involved in the political process? Oh gosh, most of us less than younger people. So I began to think about that today, and the fact that, and don't get me wrong, I would never say that President Trump is another Ronald Reagan, but his actions speak much, much louder than his words. And as I was thinking about those things, I was thinking about some of the other things that happened in the 1980s. my wife and I graduated from Texas Tech University with a BA in political science. I actually said publicly one time that I would never be involved in politics. So there's a moral to that story, and is be very careful about what you say publicly you're never going to do.
So true.
I tell people that there's a Democrat Attorney General, Jim Maddox, or his friend and foe alike used to call him Junkyard Dog Jim Maddox, because he was on the very left of the political spectrum in the Democratic Party. He's the guy who got me involved politically. So you might think that's a strange thing, that a wrong-rated conservative would be motivated by somebody like Jim Maddox to get involved. Let me tell you the story. In the 1980s, we had our first child in 1976. So as our children got older, we were always committed to Christian education. Not that we have anything against public education, but we wanted, as Christians, we wanted to integrate our faith with the education of our children. And today in the public schools, you can't do that. So we were looking at that, and we had a young couple who had no children that went to our church, came up to us one time, and they said, "There's this great book on homeschooling. Y'all need to read this book." And we were like, "Yes. So you have no kids, and you're telling us this would be a great thing to do." And the bottom line is the Lord has a way of maneuvering us. I tell people the Lord snookered me into homeschooling. And we decided that we would do that. One of the things we concluded was that even in the 1980s, we saw our what many people call our government education system as ignoring research and moving in political arenas, circles, promoting policies and philosophies that the vast majority of Texans and Americans don't believe in. And my wife and I concluded that someone was going to indoctrinate our children. We decided it would be us. So we decided to homeschool one year, and we homeschooled a second year, and finally it became a lifestyle. This, of course, was in the 1980s. And just to give you a little bit of history, we had a school districts begin to call the Texas Education Agency in those days and say, "We've got these really weird people who are beginning to say they're going to homeschool their kids. How do we deal with these people?" And so the TEA tasked an attorney with doing some legal research or some statutory research, and he found that in 1915, the Texas legislature passed its first compulsory attendance law. That law said that when a child was 7 years of age, they had to be in a public school or a private or parochial school that teaches the study of good citizenship, or they had to have a tutor. And in 1923, 8 years later, the legislature amended that law by striking the exemption for tutors. So this attorney with the TEA made an assumption. You know what they say about assuming something? Mm-hmm. So he made an assumption that in 1923 the legislature, by that act, had intended to outlaw the opportunity or the privilege that parents had in those days of teaching their own children at home. And as a result of that, the TEA began to give direction to school districts across the country, across the state, who are statutorily required to enforce the compulsory attendance law to prosecute families who were choosing to teach their kids at home. The issue was not, do you have a curriculum? Are you teaching your children? Are they doing well on some sort of test? The issue was, that's illegal, you can't do that. And in those days, we had a State Board of Education, and if you remember, that was the days just after HB 72. So we had, if y'all can talk about deja vu all over again, you had this blue ribbon committee put together by Governor Mark White to quote-unquote fix public education. And their conclusion was that the State Board of Education was too big, and we needed to not have an elected State Board of Education. We should have an appointed State Board of Education. And so we went from 32 members of the State Board of Education to 15. and Governor Mark White, as the first governor, appointed those people. So we had hearings over this whole thing of homeschooling, and you might not be surprised that the members of the State Board of Education were not very responsive to parents who were homeschooling. In fact, they took their marching orders from the Attorney General, Jim Maddox, aforementioned, who said that he did not believe parents were qualified to raise their children, much less teach them.
Whoa.
And if it were up to him, he would take kids away when they were 6 and put them in a kibbutz and give them back when they were 16. So when Jim Maddox made those kind of comments, I realized that if folks like you and I didn't get involved who believe in Judeo-Christian ethics and the fundamental God-given right of parents to raise their kids, people like Jim Maddox were going to be making laws, and we were going to lose the freedom to direct the education and upbringing of our children. So my family and I went to this hearing. They were going to have a hearing before the State Board of Education at the LBJ Library Auditorium on the campus of UT Austin. And they had about, that auditorium holds 1,000 people. So as my family and I want to do, we were a little late getting to that meeting, and there were 6,000 people. And so we were milling around in the rain with 5,000 people, not with the 1,000 people who were inside. So we actually about 5 years ago, we did a documentary. It's on our YouTube page now. You should look at it. It's called Taking a Stand in Texas, The Battle for Homeschool Freedom. We went back and interviewed all these people that participated. And we had a video shot of that hearing where there is a dad standing up giving his testimony, and the buzzer goes off, his 3 minutes is up, and he looks up at the State Board of Education and he says, "You can't have my children. Don't do Mark White's dirty work." And that was a huge event. You know, if you talk to politicians, they understand money and they understand numbers, and when 6,000 people come to Austin to protest something, they recognize that they have touched the nerve. So the bottom line is that I went away from that meeting, that the State Board actually asked the legislature to fix this problem, and the legislature, in true political fashion, did nothing. So they kicked that can down the road. And so the bottom line is we had a district court in Arlington rendered a decision in the Leaper case saying that homeschools had historically been and continue to be private schools. And if a parent or one standing in parental authority has a curriculum from any source that covers the basic educational goals of reading, spelling, grammar, math, and a study of good citizenship, and they're pursuing it in a bona fide manner, they are exempt from the compulsory tennis laws. And so we thought we had won a great victory, but the state appealed that decision, and they would appeal it 2 more times. But the event in Austin had a lasting impact on me. And in 1990, I became the executive director of the Texas Homeschool Coalition. And I realized that we had to connect with homeschoolers, we had to educate homeschoolers, we had to motivate homeschoolers to become involved in the process. Because if we didn't get involved in the process, then people who did not hold our values would be electing people and making decisions that directly impacted us. So that was over 30 years ago. And so today I would tell you that the empirical data about whether or not parents can teach their own kids at home successfully is overwhelming. There's not a state in the country that does not allow parents to teach their kids at home. And the states, of course, education is directly regulated at the state level. And so each state has its own regulations and restrictions. Texas is extolled or denigrated, depending on your point of view, because we have great freedom for families to direct the education and upbringing of their children. So as a result of that, we have seen a great growth in that. Homeschoolers have become an and not just in Texas, but across the country, we have become part of the successful election coalition of conservative Republicans. And so we continue to do that. The interesting thing as we move forward on this whole issue of education is I find it interesting that today we have this, and I should probably touch on the states that regulate homeschoolers. It would probably not surprise you that my friends in the People's Republic of New York or Pennsylvania are highly, highly regulated. You have to register with the state, you have to get approved curriculum, you have to do annual testing, all those kinds of things. And then there are states like Texas and Oklahoma and Michigan who are relatively free. And so we see that pattern continuing. And of course, up until 2008, what we saw across the country, the pattern was an increasing effort by state legislatures to give more freedom and flexibility to families who were homeschooling. Because the empirical data showed that homeschool families as a group, their students score 15 to 30 points above the national average. You know, in Texas we have a saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so, those numbers actually are true state by state, regardless of the level of state regulation. So years ago in the 80s and 90s, when we were fighting efforts at the state legislature to bring quote-unquote accountability, you know, what legislators or bureaucrats mean when they say we need accountability in education, that means we need state regulation or oversight. And so when I would go down there, I would say, okay, here's the data. Here's the data from across the country. Homeschoolers score 15 to 30 points above the national average, and that is regardless of whether you're in states like New York and Pennsylvania that have virtually, I shouldn't say no freedom, but very limited freedom, or states like Texas and Oklahoma and other states who have unfettered freedom. So my point would be, if your argument is that we need the state to regulate, to quote-unquote ensure that no kids are falling through the cracks, show me that data. The most regulated education system in the state of Texas is the public education system, and I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think anybody here today would argue that we don't have a problem in the public education system. So in the last two sessions, we have now seen a move, as we have across the country, to expand homeschool freedom through a mechanism referred to as education savings accounts. And these are different from the old quote-unquote voucher. You know, a voucher was something that they did in Milwaukee. In fact, there are 30 states that have some form of school choice, where the parent is empowered to have more choices and get more direction in the education of their children. And so the early forms were you get a voucher with a portion from the state, and you can take that voucher and pay for it at a private school for the tuition of your child. The education savings accounts are different. They are actually a card that goes to the parent, and the parent can then use that money to facilitate different education needs of their children. They can use it for curriculum. A lot of states started this kind of legislation for special needs children. And it might surprise you, there are a very large number of homeschoolers who have special needs children. And that's because their experience in the public education system is that the parents are generally ignored and quote-unquote experts are said, here's what we're going to do for your child. So the interesting thing is Arizona started this, and it is a way to empower parents. So when I spoke in favor of the Senate version of that education savings account in the last legislative session, and the arguments that came up again in these legislative bills were that there was no quote-unquote accountability in the system. There was no government oversight. And so here's the response that I made from a perspective of a homeschool dad and a homeschool advocate over the last 30 years. The arguments that we are hearing today in regard to school choice are the very same arguments that we heard 30 years ago When people like Jim Maddox are saying parents are not qualified. They're not professional educators. We should not let them have this opportunity. Kids will grow up being uneducated. They will not be productive members of our society. All of which actually were proven to be untrue. So when I gave my testimony, and these questions came about the lack of accountability, this was my response. I said, I believe, our organization believes that parents, that families have a God-given right and a fundamental constitutional right to raise their children as they see fit. And absent abuse or neglect, that right should not be hindered by the government.
Amen.
So what does 30 years of empirical data for homeschooling have to say about the issue of accountability? The points I just made to you was that we're scoring 15 to 30 points above the national average, where parents are the one where the accountability is. So you go to a homeschool co-op meeting or something like that, there are all sorts of opportunities out there for parents today. Online opportunities. And here's the great thing. You know what a parent that's homeschooling does when they go to a co-op or they go to an online program and they find it insufficient? Or they find it not meeting their children's need, or they find it not worth the value? They take their dollars and they go someplace else. That sounds strangely to me like the free market system at work. And most of us Republicans today believe in the free market. We believe that if you let the consumer choose the product, he will get the best product at the best price delivered at the best time. And yet, strangely, when it comes to our education system, we defend a monopolistic system that frustrates both teachers and parents. And I would submit to you that the data shows that the more we empower parents who have the best interests of their children at heart. In fact, that always reminds me of Senator Phil Gramm. Y'all remember Senator Phil Gramm? Phil was really known for some of his country sayings. He used to say, the only thing in the middle of the road are yellow stripes and dead skunks. So I like that. But he also used to say, in regard to government bureaucrats who profess to have better than parents the interests of children in mind, he would say that one of them gave some testimony one time, and the guy said, well, we really believe this is better. And the guy says, well, do you think you know better than these parents? He said, yes. He said, well, do you know the names of the children of those parents? He said, of course not. And of course, the point he was trying to make is that the parents know the children. They know their learning styles, they know their needs, they know best how to meet those needs, much, much better than a bureaucrat. And of course, so we continue to see that debate today. And we'll see it again in the next legislative session. The exciting thing to me is we are looking at other states, Florida, Arizona, Nevada, are all moving forward incrementally to empower families to make these decisions for their children. So here's the argument we always hear on the other. In fact, y'all have probably heard Little Beto make some of these comments in reference to Senator Cruz. Senator Cruz is a great proponent of families and conservatism, and at the end of last year, he was working with Congressman Kevin Brady, and they were revamping the federal legislation regarding 529 savings accounts. If you're not familiar, these are federal savings accounts where a person can put their own money in it, deferred tax-wise, and then use it for college expenses. So Congressman Brady, another great friend, was amending this federal bill or federal statute to allow these same sorts of savings accounts to be used by people for K through 12 education expenses. So they made that change in the House, and when they got to the Senate with that bill, Senator Cruz said, I think we should include homeschoolers as well as traditional private schools. Kevin Brady accepted that change. It came to the Senate floor, and would you be surprised if I told you that Bernie Sanders stood up and objected to that under the Senate rules, and the parliamentarian agreed with him, and so homeschoolers were thrown under the bus and excluded from that piece of legislation and discriminated against. And I think I would say that typifies the difference between the two parties. Republicans believe in faith and family and country, and they believe in empowering parents. And the Democrats, or maybe I should say the socialists, believe that the all-powerful government should be the one that directing those things. So I'm excited about the prospects that we have for the future. I am reminded when I got involved in the Republican Party, I went to my first Republican precinct convention in 1984, and my first Republican state convention in 1986. And when I got involved in the party, we had this debate, we had this division about issues in the Republican Party. And in those days, in fact, I would tell you that we fought in the party for about 10 years over the issue of abortion. And so when we went to those conventions, I'm telling you, we fought till late in the night, and there were our Republican friends who basically said, you know, that should not be an issue. That's a divisive issue. I remember having a seat on a plane. I'm not going to tell you the elected official's name, because you would know him, but this was in the early 90s, and we had this very serious conversation, and he was saying to me, Tim, abortion is not a winning issue for us politically. I mean, and that was they were actually taking that from the mainstream media. And I responded to him and I said, look, you're reading this wrong. You can go out there and take the poll numbers, but let me tell you, the passion and the motivating force is on the pro-life side. People are passionate about defending life. I don't think these people that are not pro-life are not that passionate. And so I tell you that because we spent 10 years fighting internally, and today I haven't heard of a Republican, especially in Texas, argue that he's not pro-life, because that is now the established position of the Republican Party in Texas. And we as an organization are working to elevate the fundamental God-given constitutional right of parents to make decisions for their children to that same level. So I hate to tell you, we still have people in Austin who believe that the government should oversee and sign off on these decisions that parents make. I used to get calls, but we won the Leaper decision in 1987. We finally won the Supreme Court review of that in 1994. But prior to that, we had ongoing battles with superintendents, and I'll never forget having a conversation. A Hispanic mom called me. She had just withdrawn her 9th grader from a public school. They had to bring a curriculum in, and they said, this is not sufficient, you can't homeschool. So I called up this curriculum expert at the public schools, and I asked her about this situation, and she said, well, I asked this mom what she was going to do about good citizenship. And she said she couldn't answer, so I said, then your curriculum's not approved. And I said, well, let me ask you, just so you know, the courts have said that good citizenship is a study of government or civics. How many of y'all graduated from a public high school in Texas? When did you take civics? Anybody remember?
High school.
Okay, I took it a half a semester the senior year of high school. And the only reason I remember that is because I couldn't wait to get out and was bored to death and don't remember anything from that class. So this woman said, is it in your curriculum? And she said, well, it's in our scope and sequence. So I knew that they weren't teaching civics to that kid in the 9th grade. They didn't do that till the senior year. So there was a double standard even in those days. And so I basically said, well, look, it's in her curriculum as well. And if you guys have a problem with that, then we may have to sue you. So I tell you these things because the Republican Party was redefined. Would anybody disagree with this by Ronald Reagan? He redefined the Republican Party. It became the party of limited government and more individual freedom. And I have to tell you, I'm willing to admit this publicly, I was concerned about Donald Trump. And I think that, in fact, I had lots of conversations. People would ask me, Tim, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I was kind of a cruise guy, and Trump wasn't my choice, my first choice. But here are our choices. Our choice is Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And I'm not sure about him, but I am very sure about him. And I have to tell you that the liberal left continued to eviscerate the evangelical right in this country because they voted in historic numbers for Donald Trump. And I have to tell you, I said, you know what, I'm one of them. And I understood very clearly, we were motivated out of fear. You know what was motivating us? What was motivating us is we are this close from losing our country with a liberal majority on the U.S. Supreme Court. So he's not my first choice. But I have to tell you,
best choice.
He was the best choice, and I've got to tell you, I'm pretty excited about what he's doing.
Amen.
Amen. So anyway, my point is, he's a fighter. We're fighters, and I am excited about where we are, and we're moving forward, I think, on empowering parents, and we'll continue to see that in the next legislative session. And I think we're out of time.
Well, Tim, don't go yet. Let me ask you guys something. How many of you guys are homeschoolers? Stand up, raise your hand.
Raise our hand.
Raise your hand. Great.
Let me show you a really good example of a kid. Ray's son, who I knew from knee-high to a grasshopper, was a homeschooler, right? Well, he used to be president of the Homeschool Association. That kid is one of the youngest PhDs I know now. Congratulations, Ray.
Thank you guys, y'all been very gracious, appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim.